Arundel did not believe in accidents. In his world, every debt had a hand behind it, every betrayal had a price, and every trembling voice across a table usually meant someone was already lying. That night, rain hammered the windows of a 24-hour diner at the edge of the city. The place smelled of burnt coffee, cheap oil, and wet coats. It was the kind of place powerful men only entered when they wanted no cameras, no witnesses who mattered, and no official record. Arundel sat in the back booth with one arm resting along the cracked leather seat. Across from him, a city councilman named Orwin kept wiping sweat from his neck, even though the diner was cold. "I can move the warehouse permits by Friday," Orwin said quickly. "But the police audit is getting close. If my name appears beside your shipping companies, I'm finished." Arundel looked at the folder on the table, then at the man's shaking hands. "You were finished the moment you borrowed money from my rivals and thought I would not hear about it." Orwin swallowed hard. Arundel's voice stayed calm. That was what made it worse. People expected alphas like him to roar. Arundel rarely needed to. He had built his underground logistics empire on silence, fear, and precision. Trucks moved when he ordered them to move. Men disappeared when he decided they no longer needed to breathe. Even the politicians who hated him still took his calls. His right-hand guard stood near the old jukebox, pretending to read the menu. 2 more men waited outside in an unmarked car. Everything was controlled. Then Arundel smelled something he had not smelled in years. It was faint, buried under coffee, rain, suppressants, and the metallic scent of exhaustion. But it reached him anyway. A soft omega pheromone, unstable and almost hidden, brushed across his senses like a memory opening a locked door. Arundel's gaze moved from Orwin to the counter. The waiter there was wiping down cups with quick, tense movements. His name tag read Cowie. He looked tired in the way people looked when sleep had become a luxury and survival had become a habit. He moved like someone used to taking care of himself, shoulders straight even when his hands were shaking. When a drunk customer snapped his fingers, Cowie did not flinch. He simply looked at him and said, "Coffee is coming. Snapping will not make my hands grow faster." The customer muttered and looked away. Arundel almost smiled. Almost. Cowie's scent shifted again, and something in Arundel's chest tightened. Not desire, not exactly. Something older. Something that made no sense. A shelter corridor. A broken wooden toy. A child's voice calling him Hyung in the dark. Arundel's fingers curled against the edge of the booth. Orwin was still talking. "Mr. Arundel, I swear, I can make this work if you give me 3 more days." Arundel did not answer. Because the diner door opened, and 3 men walked in. They were not customers. Their coats were too dry beneath the rain, their eyes too alert, their hands too close to their waists. Arundel recognized the type immediately. Debt collectors working for a rival crew that had been pushing into his territory for months. But they were not looking at him. They went straight to Cowie. The largest one leaned both hands on the counter. "Rent was due last week." Cowie's face tightened, but his voice stayed level. "I told Rusk I get paid Friday. Rusk is tired of waiting. I am tired of repeating myself, but here we are." The man's smile vanished. He reached over the counter and grabbed Cowie's wrist. Arundel stood before he had decided to move. The diner went quiet in layers. First Orwin stopped talking. Then the guard near the jukebox straightened. Then even the cook behind the kitchen window froze with a spatula in his hand. The collector turned when Arundel's hand closed around his forearm. Cowie's wrist was released instantly. Arundel did not raise his voice. He said Friday. The collector's eyes narrowed, then widened as recognition hit him. His confidence drained so fast it was almost embarrassing. "Mr. Arundel," he said, voice cracking. "We did not know this was your business." "It is not." The collector tried to breathe. "But you made it my evening." Cowie stared at Arundel from behind the counter, still holding his wrist. There was fear in his eyes, but not helplessness. He was measuring him, trying to decide whether this alpha was a savior, a threat, or something worse. Arundel released the collector with a shove. "Tell Rusk if he wants to collect debts, he can do it outside my district. If I see his dogs near this diner again, I will send them back without hands." The 3 men backed away quickly. The bell above the door shook when they left. For a moment, only the rain spoke. Cowie exhaled, slow and controlled. "Thank you. You should be more careful who you borrow from." "I did not borrow from them," Cowie said, jaw tightening. "My mother's hospital bills did." That answer landed harder than Arundel expected. He looked at the red mark around Cowie's wrist, then at the way Cowie immediately hid it behind his apron as if pain was something private. Orwin cleared his throat weakly from the booth. Erundare ignored him. "You work here every night?" he asked. Cowie gave him a guarded look. "Are you asking out of concern or because you are deciding whether to buy the building?" This time, Erundare did smile faintly. "Both are possible." "Then no. I work wherever they pay me." Erundare stepped past him to return to the booth. In that narrow space between counter and aisle, his sleeve brushed Cowie's apron. It looked accidental. It was not. Erundare had learned to steal before he had learned to read contracts. His fingers moved once, light and clean, and the cheap wallet slipped from Cowie's apron pocket into his own coat. He told himself it was necessary. Rusk's men had targeted Cowie too directly. An Omega drowning in debt could be bait, a courier, an informant, or a victim being used by someone smarter. Erundare did not survive by trusting sad eyes and familiar scents. Still, when he sat back down, the wallet felt strangely heavy inside his jacket. 10 minutes later, Orwin signed the transfer papers with a shaking hand. Erundare left the diner without looking back, though he felt Cowie's gaze follow him all the way to the door. Inside the armored car, the city blurred behind rain-covered glass. His guard asked where to go. "Home," Erundare said. Then he pulled out the wallet. It was worn at the edges, overstuffed with receipts, expired coupons, and a hospital ID card with Cowie's face on it. Registered nurse. Suspended status. Erundare's mouth hardened. So that part had been true. There was almost no cash inside. He pushed past it and found a folded piece of thick paper tucked behind the lining. Not paper. A photograph. The moment he opened it, the air seemed to leave the car. 2 children stood in a shelter courtyard. One was a boy with a bandage across his cheek, holding out a small wooden bird. The other was a younger Omega child staring at the toy like it was the first kind thing the world had ever given him. Erundare's thumb froze over the image. He knew that boy. He had been that boy. And the child beside him. Little bird. His pulse slowed, then turned heavy. Behind the photo was something else. A yellowed check, folded carefully, protected like a relic. Erundare opened it. The name on the signature line struck harder than any bullet. His father's name. The amount was enormous. Enough to buy silence. Enough to erase a life. But the date made Erundare's blood go cold. The check had been signed several days after his father's official death. For years, Erundare had believed his father died in an assassination that pushed him into the Mafia's bloodiest war. He had built an empire from that grief. He had killed men for that truth. Now, in the back of a silent car, holding the wallet of an Omega he had just met again after half a lifetime, Erundare stared at proof that the truth had been a lie. Rain slid down the window like black veins. His hand, the same hand that had ordered executions without trembling, shook around the old photograph. Cowie was not bait. Cowie was not a coincidence. Cowie was the boy Erundare had once promised to come back for. And somehow, he was carrying the secret that could destroy everything Erundare had become. Erundare did not sleep that night. Long after the city lights faded behind the windows of his penthouse, the old photograph still sat on the kitchen counter beside the yellowed check, both of them feeling less like objects and more like explosives waiting to detonate. He had spent years believing the past was buried beneath blood, money, and the empire he built with his own hands, yet one cheap wallet stolen in a diner had cracked open memories he had not allowed himself to touch since childhood. By sunrise, half his intelligence network was already moving. A private investigator dug into Cowie's employment records while Erundare's financial team traced the impossible check connected to his father's name. Another group quietly followed the debt collectors tied to Rusk's crew. Erundare wanted every piece of information before he made another move. Instinct told him Cowie was not dangerous, but instincts had nearly gotten him killed before. The reports arrived faster than expected. Cowie had once been one of the youngest trauma nurses hired at a major hospital before his suspension 3 months earlier over missing restricted medication. No charges had ever been proven, but the hospital board froze his access anyway, effectively destroying his career overnight. His mother had died 6 months ago after a long illness that buried him under debt large enough to drown most people. Since then, Cowie had been juggling diner shifts, delivery work, and freelance medical jobs just to survive. No criminal history. No connection to rival syndicates. No hidden accounts. Just a tired Omega barely holding his life together. Erundare read the report twice before tossing it onto the table. Something ugly twisted in his chest when he imagined Cowie working double shifts while scavengers like Rusk circled around him waiting for weakness. The feeling annoyed him. Possessiveness had always come naturally to alphas, but this was different. He did not want to own Cowie. He wanted the pressure around him gone. That realization unsettled him more than violence ever had. Late the next night, rain started again. Cowie stepped out the back entrance of the diner carrying 2 trash bags and a cigarette he never actually lit. His shoulders looked tense beneath his thin jacket, and dark circles sat under his eyes like bruises. He barely made it 3 steps before stopping suddenly and patting his pockets. Then his expression changed. Panic. He checked again, faster this time, searching his apron, jacket, and bag before pressing a hand against his forehead in frustration. Arundel watched from the shadows beside a parked car for several quiet seconds before stepping forward. You look like someone just stole your life savings. Cowie's head snapped up instantly. His posture tightened until he recognized him beneath the streetlight glow. You, Cowie exhaled. The terrifyingly rich guy from the diner. Arundel almost smirked. That is one way to introduce me. You never introduced yourself at all. Arundel pulled the worn wallet from his coat pocket and held it out casually. You dropped this near the curb yesterday. Cowie grabbed it immediately and opened it so quickly the contents nearly spilled into the alley. He ignored the cash completely and reached straight for the folded photograph and check hidden inside. The second he felt them still there, relief softened his face so openly that Arundel had to look away for a moment. Thank God, Cowie muttered quietly. I thought it was gone. You keep something important in there. Cowie zipped the wallet shut and held it close to his chest. It belonged to my mother. Not a lie. Not the full truth either. Arundel leaned one shoulder against the brick wall beside the back door. You work every night? Pretty much. That sounds miserable. It is miserable, Cowie replied bluntly. But misery still pays better than unemployment. For the first time, Arundel noticed how exhausted Cowie truly looked. Not physically alone, but the deeper kind of exhaustion that came from carrying everything alone for too long. You should quit this place, Arundel said before thinking. Cowie stared at him like he had lost his mind. Are you offering to sponsor me now? Would your pride survive it? My pride is the only thing that survived this year. That answer landed harder than Arundel expected. A cold gust of wind swept through the alley, carrying Cowie's faint pheromone scent with it again. The suppressants hiding it were cheap and unstable. Arundel could smell the sharp chemical edge underneath the softer scent trying to break through. Any alpha paying attention would notice eventually. Dangerous. Cowie shoved the wallet back into his pocket and crossed his arms. So what exactly do you do? Logistics. That sounds fake. It is mostly paperwork. That sounds even faker. This time Arundel laughed quietly under his breath, and Cowie blinked like he genuinely had not expected him capable of making human sounds. The silence between them shifted after that. Not comfortable yet, but no longer sharp. A black sedan rolled slowly past the alley entrance before continuing down the street. Arundel's expression changed instantly. He recognized the car. One of his own surveillance teams, which meant someone inside the organization had already noticed his interest in Cowie. Too fast. Cowie followed his gaze. Problem? No. You say that like someone trained you to lie professionally. They did. Cowie snorted softly before pulling his jacket tighter. Well, mysterious fake logistics guy, thanks for returning the wallet. Arundel. Cowie paused. What? My name. Something flickered across Cowie's expression for half a second. Recognition almost surfaced, then disappeared just as quickly. Right, Cowie said slowly. I'm Cowie. I know. The words slipped out before Arundel could stop them. Cowie frowned immediately. That sounded creepy. Arundel recovered without blinking. Your hospital ID is visible through the plastic sleeve. Cowie relaxed slightly, though suspicion still lingered in his eyes. Then his phone buzzed. He checked the screen, and whatever he read drained the remaining color from his face. What happened? Arundel asked. Cowie hesitated before answering. The hospital rejected my appeal again. Something dangerously cold settled behind Arundel's ribs. Because he knew exactly who sat on that hospital board. And he also knew none of them would still have jobs by morning. Cowie shoved the phone back into his pocket and forced out a tired smile. Anyway, thanks again for the wallet. Try not to terrify politicians too much tonight. He turned toward the street, then suddenly stumbled. Arundel caught him before he hit the pavement. The second their bodies touched, Cowie's pheromones surged violently beneath the suppressants. Heat flooded the narrow alley in one unstable wave, sharp enough that Arundel's alpha instincts snapped awake instantly. Cowie froze in horror. "No," he whispered under his breath. "Not now." Arundel tightened his grip around him as nearby footsteps echoed somewhere at the alley entrance. And for the first time in years, genuine alarm crossed the alpha's face. Arundel moved before the approaching footsteps even reached the alley entrance. One arm tightened around Cowie's waist while the other pulled open the back door of the black sedan parked nearby. Cowie barely had time to protest before Arundel pushed him gently, but firmly into the leather back seat and slid in after him. The driver took one glance through the mirror, saw Arundel's expression, and immediately pulled away from the curb without a single question. Cowie pressed himself against the door, breathing unevenly as he struggled to steady the sudden pheromone surge flooding the car. His suppressants were failing fast now, leaving behind the sharp scent of instability that wrapped around the confined space like heat trapped beneath skin. "This is bad," Cowie muttered, dragging a trembling hand through his hair. "No, this is really bad." Arundel loosened his tie slowly, forcing his own alpha instincts under control before speaking. "How long have you been using those suppressants?" "A few months." "Those are black market suppressants." Cowie looked away immediately, which was answer enough. "They were cheaper," he admitted quietly. "I didn't exactly have options." Arundel's jaw tightened. He hated hearing that tone from Cowie, hated the casual acceptance of suffering buried inside his voice like pain had simply become routine. Outside the tinted windows, rain streaked across the city in silver lines while the car sped deeper into downtown traffic. "You should have gone to a clinic." "With what money?" Arundel had no response to that. The silence stretched between them until Cowie suddenly laughed once under his breath, exhausted and bitter. "You know what the funniest part is? 3 years working emergency trauma, and I still somehow ended up losing my license because the hospital board needed someone disposable to blame." "You did not steal the medication." Cowie looked over sharply. That sounded less like a question and more like a threat toward whoever accused me. Maybe it was. For a moment, Cowie simply stared at him. The tension inside the car shifted strangely again, becoming softer around the edges despite the unstable pheromones flooding the air. The sedan finally stopped beneath a private underground entrance connected to one of Arundel's hidden penthouses. Before Cowie could question it, Arundel opened the door and stepped out first. "You are staying here tonight." Cowie blinked. "That was not a suggestion, was it?" "No. That is a very alpha thing to say. And you are very difficult to keep alive." Cowie rolled his eyes, but he still followed him upstairs. The penthouse sat high above the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking rain-soaked streets below. The place was quiet, expensive, and almost painfully clean, like nobody had ever truly lived there. Cowie noticed it immediately. "This place looks like someone designed it for a magazine instead of a person." Arundel removed his coat and tossed it onto the couch. "I do not spend much time here. That explains the lack of soul." Normally, people became nervous around Arundel after entering his space. Cowie somehow became more sarcastic instead. It should have annoyed him. Instead, it made the room feel less empty. Cowie barely made it halfway across the living room before his knees weakened again. Arundel caught him instantly, one hand gripping his waist while the other steadied his shoulder. The contact sent another violent wave of pheromones through both of them. Cowie cursed under his breath and turned his face away. "You should stay back. You are barely standing. That is exactly why you should stay back." Arundel understood immediately. Any alpha would. A vulnerable omega in preheat with unstable suppressants was dangerous for both of them, especially in a confined space. But walking away felt impossible. Instead, Arundel guided Cowie toward the bedroom and sat him carefully on the edge of the bed. Cowie's breathing had become shallow now, his body visibly tense as he fought the rising heat clawing through his system. "There should be emergency suppressants in the bathroom cabinet," Arundel said quietly. Cowie disappeared into the bathroom for several minutes before returning with a small injector in his hand and frustration written across his face. "Expired," he muttered. "Of course they are." Arundel swore softly under his breath. The nearest trusted clinic was nearly 40 minutes away, and there was no guarantee the people following Cowie were not already tracking his pheromones. Cowie sat heavily against the headboard and squeezed his eyes shut. "I just need it to pass. That is not how unstable heat works." I know how heat works, Alpha. The sharpness in his voice faded halfway through the sentence when another wave hit him. His hands trembled as he gripped the blanket beneath him. Erundere stayed standing near the window, forcing distance between them while trying not to inhale too deeply. Cowie's scent had changed completely now, softer and warmer beneath the chemical bitterness of failing suppressants. It reached something ugly and instinctive inside him. Protect him. Keep him close. Do not let anyone touch him. Erundere clenched his fists hard enough to ache. Why are you helping me? Cowie suddenly asked, voice quieter now. The question lingered in the dim room. Erundere could have lied again. He had spent most of his life surviving through lies polished smooth enough to sound effortless. But looking at Cowie now, exhausted and vulnerable, yet still stubbornly trying to hold himself together, made dishonesty feel strangely impossible. You remind me of someone. Cowie gave a weak laugh. That sounds dangerous. It probably is. Another silence settled between them before Cowie slowly leaned sideways against the headboard, clearly losing the fight to stay conscious. Then very softly he spoke again. When I was little, he murmured, half delirious already, there was an alpha at the shelter who used to protect me. Erundere's heartbeat slowed. Cowie continued without opening his eyes. Everyone else was scared of him because he fought all the time, but he always shared food with me anyway. The room suddenly felt too small. He carved me a wooden bird once, Cowie whispered. I used to think he forgot about me after he left. Erundere stared at him in silence. Because he still remembered sitting on the shelter staircase late at night, carving that stupid bird from broken wood stolen behind the kitchen dumpsters, while a tiny Omega boy watched beside him with tired eyes and scraped knees. Cowie shifted weakly beneath the blanket. Funny, right? I can barely even remember his face now. Something inside Erundere twisted painfully. Then Cowie's body tensed sharply as another heat wave crashed through him. His breathing broke into a quiet sound somewhere between pain and panic. That was the moment Erundere stopped fighting distance. He crossed the room, sat beside Cowie carefully, and pulled him against his chest. Cowie stiffened at first before instinct slowly overpowered caution, his body leaning into the warmth automatically. Erundere rested one hand against the back of his neck, while forcing his own alpha instincts into chains. I have you, he said quietly. Just sleep. Cowie's fingers weakly curled into the fabric of Erundere's shirt. Then, half asleep and completely defenseless, he whispered one word. Young. Erundere froze. Outside the penthouse windows, thunder rolled across the city. And downstairs, inside the underground garage, one of Erundere's guards stared at the security monitor with growing alarm as a black SUV slowly pulled into the building across the street. Vale's men had finally found them. The first bullet shattered the penthouse window less than 10 minutes after Cowie fell asleep against Erundere's chest. Erundere reacted instantly. One arm locked around Cowie while the other grabbed the handgun beneath the side table before a second shot exploded through the glass wall overlooking the city. Cowie jerked awake in confusion just as Erundere forced both of them down behind the bed. Stay down, Erundere ordered sharply. The sound of automatic gunfire ripped through the upper floor, followed by screaming alarms from the security system. Downstairs, one of Erundere's guards shouted into a radio before the line cut off abruptly. Cowie's face drained of color. What the hell is happening? Erundere checked the chamber of his pistol with terrifying calm. Vale found us faster than I expected. Cowie stared at him. You mean the same Vale who raised you? Yes. And he sent armed men after me? You are connected to the truth he buried 20 years ago. Erundere looked toward the shattered hallway entrance as footsteps approached. Which means keeping you alive just became very inconvenient for him. Another burst of gunfire tore through the apartment. Erundere grabbed Cowie's wrist and pulled him toward the private elevator hidden behind the bedroom wall. The doors slid open just as two armed men crashed through the hallway entrance. The first man barely had time to raise his rifle before Erundere shot him directly through the chest. Cowie froze. Not because of the blood, because of how easily Erundere did it. No hesitation. No adrenaline. Just cold precision. The second attacker fired wildly while backing toward cover, but Erundere shoved Cowie behind the elevator wall before returning fire. The man dropped instantly. The entire penthouse smelled like gunpowder, shattered concrete, and unstable pheromones. Erundere pressed the emergency elevator code. We are leaving. Cowie did not move. His eyes stayed fixed on the body bleeding across the marble floor. You really are him, he said quietly. Erundere's jaw tightened. The stories about the alpha who runs the city, Cowie continued slowly. That was you the entire time. The elevator doors opened. Arundel stepped closer. Cowie, you lied to me. Yes. You watched me trust you anyway. The words hit harder than bullets. Before Arundel could answer, another explosion shook the upper floor violently enough to crack the ceiling lights. Instinct overrode emotion immediately. Arundel grabbed Cowie and forced him inside the elevator, just as smoke burst into the hallway behind them. The private elevator descended rapidly toward the underground garage while tension crushed the silence between them. Cowie kept staring straight ahead. Not at Arundel. Not anymore. By the time the doors opened below ground, a black SUV was already waiting with 2 surviving guards beside it. One looked injured. The other looked terrified. Sir, Vale's people hit 3 of the outer properties simultaneously, the guard reported quickly. Someone inside leaked all your movements. Arundel opened the rear passenger door for Cowie first. Cowie hesitated before climbing inside. That hesitation bothered Arundel more than the gunfire upstairs. The SUV tore through underground service roads beneath the city, while rain hammered the streets overhead. No one spoke for almost 15 minutes. Cowie sat pressed against the window with his arms crossed tightly, his expression unreadable beneath the flashing lights outside. Finally, Arundel broke the silence. I did not approach you because of the organization. Cowie laughed softly without humor. That is somehow supposed to make me feel better? I approached you because I recognized you. Cowie turned toward him slowly. Recognized me from where? Arundel held his gaze for several long seconds before answering. The shelter. Cowie went completely still. You were the Omega kid who used to follow me everywhere, Arundel continued quietly. You carried that broken bird for years even after the other children laughed at it. Cowie stared at him like the world had tilted sideways. No, he whispered. That is impossible. Arundel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the old photograph from the wallet. He handed it over silently. Cowie looked down at the faded image. Then at Arundel. Then back at the photograph again. His breathing changed first. You are, his voice cracked slightly. You are the alpha from the shelter. Arundel nodded once. The realization hit Cowie visibly, years of forgotten memories crashing back all at once beneath the flashing lights of the moving SUV. The quiet older alpha who always fought other kids for touching his food. The boy who carved birds from stolen wood scraps. The one person who had ever protected him there. Young, Cowie whispered before catching himself immediately. The words settled heavily between them. For the first time since leaving the penthouse, some of the fear inside Cowie's eyes softened. Then reality returned just as quickly. You still lied to me, he said more quietly now. Arundel did not deny it. The SUV finally reached an abandoned safe house hidden beyond the industrial edge of the city. The building looked forgotten from outside, but the interior had already been secured with weapons, surveillance equipment, and emergency supplies. Cowie stepped inside slowly, exhaustion written across every movement. You have a lot of these places, he asked. Enough. That is somehow more concerning than comforting. One of the guards brought medical supplies before disappearing upstairs. Arundel locked the steel entrance behind them personally before turning back toward Cowie. Blood stained the side of Cowie's sleeve. Arundel moved immediately. You are hurt. It is a scratch. Sit down. That sounded less like concern and more like a command again. Arundel exhaled slowly through his nose. Cowie. Something in his tone made Cowie finally sit. The cut along his arm was shallow, probably from shattered glass during the attack, but Arundel still cleaned it carefully while Cowie watched him in silence. You know, Cowie murmured after a while, this is not how I imagined finding my childhood protector again. You imagined it? Cowie looked away immediately. Not consciously. Arundel wrapped fresh gauze around Cowie's arm before speaking again. I did try to come back. Cowie blinked. The shelter burned down before I could. That answer silenced the room. Cowie remembered the fire now. The screaming. The smoke. The staff separating children into different transport vans while everyone cried and disappeared into the system. You vanished, Cowie said quietly. So did you. The emotional distance between them narrowed again despite everything that happened. For a moment, the safe house almost felt warm. Then footsteps echoed from upstairs. One of Arundel's men descended with visible tension on his face. Sir, he said carefully. There is another issue. Arundel stood immediately. What? The guard hesitated before answering. Vale released your identity to the entire city tonight. Silence crashed through the room. The guard continued carefully. Police task forces are already moving against several syndicate properties, and rival crews are mobilizing because they think you are weakened. Cowie looked at Arundel slowly. You are being hunted now too, he realized. Arundel's expression darkened dangerously. No, he said quietly. We are. Then his phone vibrated. One message appeared across the screen. Bring the Omega to me, or everyone connected to him dies next. For the first time since Cowie met him again, genuine fury broke through Arundel's controlled mask completely. And Cowie suddenly realized just how terrifying an alpha could become when someone threatened the person he cared about. The safe house stopped feeling safe 2 days later. Not because Vale's men found it again, but because tension between Arundel and Cowie had become impossible to ignore. Ever since the attack at the penthouse and the truth about Arundel's identity came crashing into the open, something fragile kept pulling tight between them, stretching dangerously every time they got too close. And they were always close now. Too close. The abandoned warehouse safe house only had 2 usable rooms, which meant shared meals, shared silence, shared nights listening to rain hammer against rusted metal walls while the city hunted them both from outside. During the day, Arundel coordinated damage control through encrypted calls while rival syndicates tore apart parts of his empire, believing he had finally become vulnerable. At night, Cowie cleaned wounds, reorganized medical supplies, and quietly watched the Alpha unravel piece by piece beneath the pressure. Arundel barely slept anymore. Cowie noticed it first during the 3rd night when he woke up on the old couch and found Arundel sitting alone near the darkened window with a pistol resting loosely in one hand. The Alpha was not even pretending to relax. Every muscle in his body looked wound-tight enough to snap. You are staring at the wall like it insulted your bloodline, Cowie muttered sleepily. Arundel glanced over. Go back to sleep. That was not a denial. You should not be awake. Cowie sat up slowly, blanket slipping off one shoulder. You say that every night. Because every night you ignore me. That sounds like a personal problem. Despite everything happening around them, the corner of Arundel's mouth moved faintly upward. The expression vanished almost immediately, but Cowie still caught it. That small reaction bothered him more than it should have. Because somewhere between running for their lives and patching bullet wounds in abandoned buildings, Arundel had started feeling less like the terrifying Alpha who controlled the city, and more like the exhausted boy from the shelter who never learned how to stop fighting. That realization was dangerous, especially for Cowie. The next afternoon, one of Arundel's outer contacts arrived with information tied to Vale's private movements. The moment Arundel saw the files, his entire expression changed. What is it? Cowie asked immediately. Arundel tossed the folder onto the table. Inside were surveillance photos of an old estate hidden deep inside forest land several hours outside the city. The property looked abandoned now, but Cowie's stomach tightened the second he saw it. I know this place, he whispered. Arundel looked up sharply. Cowie swallowed once before continuing. My mother took me there once when I was little. I thought it was some rich patient's private recovery house. It belonged to my family. The room fell silent. Arundel slowly sat down across from him. This is where my father was taken after the assassination attempt. Cowie stared at the photographs again, old fragmented memories pushing slowly back into focus. Long hallways. Armed guards. The smell of antiseptic. His mother crying quietly in the bathroom while telling him never to leave the room no matter what he heard outside. Then another memory surfaced. A man screaming. Cowie's breathing changed instantly. My mother lied to me, he whispered. She always said we ran because she borrowed money from the wrong people, but he looked up slowly. She was hiding from Vale. Arundel's eyes darkened. Because she witnessed what happened there. Neither of them spoke for several seconds after that. Finally, Arundel stood and reached for his coat. We leave tonight. The drive to the forest estate took nearly 4 hours through relentless rain and empty highways. By the time they reached the outer property gates, darkness had swallowed the entire mountain road. The estate looked dead. Massive iron gates rusted beneath hanging branches while the mansion itself sat hidden deep within the trees like something abandoned by time. Yet the moment Arundel stepped from the vehicle, his expression sharpened. There is power running through the east wing, he said quietly. Cowie noticed it too a second later. One faint light behind the upper windows. Someone was still using the estate. They entered through a damaged side entrance with weapons drawn. The inside smelled like dust, old wood, and secrets left untouched too long. Cowie's pulse quickened the deeper they moved into the mansion. Memories kept hitting him in flashes now. His mother locking doors. A doctor arguing with someone downstairs. A younger Erundere unconscious in another room after the bombing. Then suddenly Cowie stopped walking. "There," he whispered. He moved toward a wall near the old study and pressed against loose paneling hidden behind shelves. Something clicked softly. A hidden compartment opened inside the wall. Erundere froze. Stacks of medical files sat inside beside old hard drives, and a small tape recorder sealed inside plastic. Cowie's hands trembled slightly as he picked it up. "My mother hid these." Erundere immediately connected one of the drives to a portable reader, while Cowie inserted the tape into the recorder. Static filled the dark room first. Then a woman's exhausted voice broke through. "If anyone finds this recording, then Vale finally realized I kept copies." Cowie stopped breathing. It was his mother. "He killed him," she whispered shakily through static. "The Alpha survived the bombing. Vale suffocated him in the recovery room himself, while the doctor and I were forced to watch. He said the organization needed a stronger heir. He said Erundere would become perfect if grief raised him instead of love." Erundere's entire body went still. The recording continued. "The Alpha wanted to shut down the Omega trafficking routes hidden inside the organization. Vale called him weak for it. That is why he died." Cowie looked toward Erundere instantly. The Alpha had gone completely pale. Years of violence. Years of blood. Years building an empire his own father had wanted destroyed. All of it crashed into him at once. Erundere staggered backward until his legs hit the edge of the desk. Then suddenly everything inside him snapped. The desk flipped violently across the room. Glass shattered. Books crashed against the walls. Cowie flinched as Erundere slammed his fist into the stone fireplace hard enough to split skin open instantly. "He made me into this," Erundere said hoarsely, breathing unevenly now. "Everything I touched turned into violence because of him." His pheromones exploded through the room with enough force to suffocate the air. Cowie moved toward him carefully despite the danger. "Erundere, I killed people for him." His voice cracked violently. "I destroyed entire crews believing I was avenging my father. You did not know. I should have." The Alpha looked genuinely broken now. Not angry anymore, but hollow in a way Cowie had never seen before. Then, unexpectedly, Erundere dropped to his knees. Cowie's chest tightened painfully at the sight. Because this was no longer the terrifying syndicate king feared across the city. This was simply a man collapsing beneath the weight of discovering his entire life belonged to someone else. Cowie knelt in front of him slowly and grabbed his bleeding hand before Erundere could pull away. "You still get to choose who you become," Cowie said quietly. Erundere laughed once under his breath, raw and ruined. "After all this?" "Yes." The silence between them trembled. Then Erundere suddenly leaned forward and buried his face against Cowie's shoulder like he had finally run out of strength to stand alone. And for the first time since Cowie met him again, the Alpha broke completely. Cowie wrapped both arms around him without hesitation while rain thundered against the mansion windows outside. But somewhere deeper inside the estate, a floorboard creaked. Neither of them noticed the armed men slowly surrounding the property. Vale had arrived. The first gunshot echoed through the forest estate, less than 30 seconds after Cowie heard the floorboard creak upstairs. Erundere reacted instantly. One arm wrapped around Cowie's waist while the other grabbed the handgun lying beside the overturned desk. The Alpha pulled Cowie behind the stone fireplace just as bullets tore through the old study windows, showering the room with shattered glass and rainwater. "They are inside already," Erundere said coldly. Cowie's pulse slammed against his ribs while voices echoed through the mansion corridors outside. Heavy footsteps. Reload clicks. Orders being shouted across radios. Vale had not come alone. Another bullet exploded into the wall above them. Erundere leaned out briefly and fired twice toward the hallway entrance. Someone screamed outside before crashing into furniture. The Alpha's face had changed completely now. The grief and collapse from moments earlier vanished beneath something sharper and infinitely more dangerous. Years of violence settled back into his body with terrifying familiarity. But Cowie saw the difference immediately. Before, Erundere fought like a weapon. Now he fought like someone protecting something. Protecting him. "Can you move?" Erundere asked without taking his eyes off the doorway. "Yes." "Good. Stay behind me no matter what happens. That is not how bullets work." It is tonight. Another wave of gunfire exploded through the corridor. Arundel grabbed Cowie's hand and moved fast, pulling him through the side exit connected to the servant hallways hidden inside the old estate. Rain leaked through cracks in the ceiling while emergency lights flashed dimly overhead. Cowie struggled to keep pace beside him. How many people did Vale bring? Enough to erase the entire property. That is comforting. It was not meant to be. The mansion shook from another explosion somewhere downstairs. Dust rained from the ceiling beams while armed men flooded the lower level, searching room by room. Arundel stopped suddenly near a narrow stairwell and checked the magazine inside his pistol. Half empty already. Then footsteps approached from below. 3 armed men rounded the corner. The first barely had time to react before Arundel shot him directly through the throat. The second raised his rifle, but Cowie slammed a metal emergency lantern into the man's face hard enough to stagger him backward. Arundel finished the last attacker instantly. The hallway fell silent again except for Cowie's uneven breathing. Arundel looked at him briefly. That was reckless. You taught me survival skills, remember? Something flickered in the Alpha's eyes, then disappeared beneath urgency. They reached the eastern wing minutes later, only to stop abruptly. Vale stood waiting near the grand staircase with nearly a dozen armed men surrounding him. The older Alpha looked completely calm despite the chaos consuming the estate around them. Rainwater dripped from his dark coat while the mansion burned slowly somewhere deeper in the west wing behind him. His gaze moved first toward Arundel, then toward Cowie. So this is the Omega, Vale said softly. The one capable of turning my greatest creation sentimental. Arundel stepped slightly in front of Cowie automatically. Do not look at him. Vale smiled faintly. There he is. The boy I raised. His expression darkened slightly. You know, I truly believed grief would sharpen you into perfection forever. Then this Omega appears, and suddenly you hesitate. You murdered my father. I saved the organization. You turned me into a weapon. Vale's eyes hardened. Because weakness gets people killed. Your father wanted to dismantle the Omega trade routes and negotiate with governments that would have destroyed us within years. He was emotional. Soft. You survived because I made sure you never became like him. The words echoed heavily through the ruined staircase hall. Cowie looked toward Arundel carefully. The Alpha's jaw had locked so tightly it almost looked painful. For years, those words would have worked on him. Power. Survival. Strength through cruelty. Everything Arundel built his life around came from the man standing in front of him now. Vale took one slow step forward. You think the city will forgive what you are? You think he can love a monster forever? Arundel's fingers tightened around the gun. Then, unexpectedly, Cowie stepped out from behind him. Every rifle in the room shifted instantly toward the Omega. Cowie, Arundel warned sharply. But Cowie ignored him completely. He looked directly at Vale. You keep talking like Arundel belongs to you. Vale's expression cooled. You raised him through violence because you needed someone easier to control than his father. Cowie continued steadily despite the guns aimed at him. You call that love because it sounds better than abuse. The room went silent. Even Vale's men hesitated slightly. Vale looked almost amused now. Careful, Omega. No, Cowie replied quietly. You should have been careful. Then he pulled the small recorder from his jacket pocket and pressed play. His mother's voice exploded through the hall speakers. Confession after confession echoed through the ruined mansion, while Vale's expression slowly changed for the first time all night. The recording detailed the murder, the trafficking network, the bribery, and the manipulation stretching back 20 years. Several armed men lowered their weapons gradually. One stepped backward entirely. Another looked directly at Vale with visible uncertainty. Arundel understood immediately. The Empire was cracking. Vale noticed it too. You ungrateful fools, he snarled suddenly, turning toward his own men. Everything you have exists because of me. One of the older guards slowly removed his finger from the trigger. We followed the Costello bloodline, he said quietly. Not a traitor. The shift happened all at once after that. Half the men turned their weapons away from Arundel. Vale's face twisted with fury. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded across the staircase hall, while men turned against each other beneath flashing emergency lights. Arundel grabbed Cowie and forced him behind a marble pillar as bullets shattered statues across the room. The mansion became a war zone. Smoke rolled through the upper floors while flames spread somewhere behind the walls. Arundel returned fire with lethal precision beside Cowie, while loyalists pushed Vale's remaining forces backward through the burning hall. Finally, through smoke and chaos, Vale appeared again near the upper staircase with a handgun raised directly toward Cowie. Arundel moved before thought existed. The shot rang out. Pain tore through his side as the bullet buried itself beneath his ribs instead of Cowie's chest. Arundel. The alpha staggered but still raised his weapon and fired once. Vale collapsed backward against the staircase railing. Silence followed seconds later. Not complete silence. The estate still burned around them while rain hammered shattered windows, but the fighting itself had ended. Cowie caught Arundel before he fully lost balance. Blood soaked rapidly through the alpha's shirt while his breathing turned uneven. "You idiot," Cowie whispered shakily while pressing both hands against the wound. "Why would you do that?" Arundel gave a weak laugh beneath the pain. "You really are asking me that now?" Cowie's eyes burned. "Shut up." Sirens echoed faintly in the distance outside the estate. Police. Federal units. Emergency response. Arundel looked toward the burning mansion slowly. Years of violence, power, and blood sat inside those walls. Everything Vale created. Everything his father once tried to destroy. Then the alpha reached into his coat and handed Cowie a flash drive. Cowie frowned. "What is this?" "Every financial account. Every politician. Every trafficking route." Arundel's expression steadied despite the blood loss. Enough evidence to destroy the entire syndicate permanently. Cowie stared at him in shock. "You are giving this to the authorities?" "I am ending it." The decision settled heavily between them. Not revenge. Not inheritance. An ending. For the first time in his life, Arundel was choosing something for himself instead of becoming what someone else designed him to be. Months later, the city looked different without the syndicate controlling half its shadows. Arrests flooded the news for weeks while politicians disappeared into investigations and underground operations collapsed one after another. And slowly, life continued. Cowie returned to hospital work under a different administration. The suspension against him vanished completely after the corruption scandal tied to the old board surfaced publicly. Things became quieter after that. Not easier, just quieter. Then one cold morning, while leaving the hospital after a brutal overnight shift, Cowie stopped abruptly outside the front entrance. Arundel stood near the curb waiting for him. No guards. No expensive suits. No weapons visible anywhere. Just Arundel. For a second neither of them moved. Then Arundel stepped forward slowly and held out something small wrapped carefully in cloth. Cowie opened it with trembling fingers. The wooden bird. Repaired perfectly. "I kept it all these years," Arundel admitted quietly. "Even when I forgot how to be anything except violent." Cowie looked up at him slowly. Rain began falling lightly around them. "When we were kids," Arundel continued softly, "I promised I would come back for you someday." Emotion tightened painfully inside Cowie's chest. "You did," he whispered. Arundel reached for his hand carefully this time, not possessive, not controlling, simply offering. And after everything they survived, Cowie finally took it willingly. Behind them, the city kept moving. But for the first time in either of their lives, neither of them was running anymore. And so, the alpha who once ruled the city through fear finally found the one place he never had to fight for, a hand willing to stay beside him freely. Thank you for listening to Arundel and Cowie's story, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next emotional journey.